Hey book nerds, welcome to my channel. So for Rereadathon I did a bunch of themed videos while I was doing the readathon, and I enjoyed that so much that I thought I was going to try and do it for other readathons. So at the moment I'm taking part in the Rereadathon, and I thought in honour of that I would talk about some of my favourite childhood books. So I'm not going to talk about the obvious ones. So I did love Harry Potter, did love A Series of Unfortunate Events. It's probably more that I'm forgetting, and I'm going to do another video where I'm going to talk about my favourite books in my kind of teenage years and also my favourite books now. But this first part's just going to be childhood, so from birth to about the age of 10, 12ish is kind of what I'm aiming for. I'm going to talk generally about some authors first. So one of the first authors I remember loving is Enid Blyton. My mum had all of her books from the 60s, I think that's when, it must have been when she got them from her childhood. So we have really old hardcover editions, and she used to just read all of them to me. My favourite one was the Book of Brownies, which was about these two brownie characters who went on this magical quest. I think they were saving a princess, and they travelled through different lands and various things happened to them. And there was a dragon bird, which was this really ugly creature, but he was really nice, and I felt so sorry and I really wanted a pet one. Yes, there were many Enid Blyton books that I loved, and I could even make a whole separate video about them, which I won't. But yeah, that's one of the very first authors I remember loving. Sadly, her work hasn't aged well in terms of racism stuff. Some of the works are fine, some of them are really difficult to read back. And also the Faraway Tree series, I loved that one. And I distinctly remember there's quite a lot of things in that, like kids hitting each other and stuff like that, which would be less acceptable now. So I loved many Enid Blyton books. The Faraway Tree series was one of my favourites as well. Absolutely loved that, and I had a little video of the cartoon of that, and also the Wishing Chair. There was a cartoon series of that as well, which I used to watch incessantly. But I loved the books first, and pretty much all of the Enid Blyton ones. I never really cared for the Famous Five actually, or the Secret Seven. I wasn't really into those ones, but any with the fantasy worlds or magical characters I absolutely adored. So the next author I'm going to talk about is K.A. Applegate. Sometimes writes under Catherine Applegate, and that is the author of the Animorphs series. She's written lots and lots of things. Her husband is Michael Grant, and they basically, as far as I'm aware, co-write all their books together. And then, so the books written under her name have influence from him, and the books written under his name have influence from her. But the Animorphs series was the first one that I really loved, and I used to get them all at the library. It's about a group of kids who see a spaceship crash, and then there's a dying alien inside, and the dying alien tells them that their planet's being invaded by these creatures who they're like slugs, and they slither into your brain and control you. So all the humans in their life might not actually be human, they could be controlled by these aliens. And then the dying alien, right before he dies, gives them the magical power to morph into animals. So essentially any animal they come across, they touch it and acquire its DNA, and then they can change into a copy of that animal. It was a really cool series. It was very violent, dealt with a lot of complex issues. The characters were all really strong. It's a really cool concept to begin with, the fact that you're changing into animals to save the world. And yeah, I just loved it. My favourite one was The Journey, which I want to say is number 42, but I'm not positive about the number. But that was where they all, these tiny aliens invaded Marco's body, who's one of the characters, and all the other characters had to shrink down and go inside his body to fight the aliens before they killed him. And that was just really it was a really cool story. I'll always love the Animorphs series. Another author I absolutely loved, I don't know how well known she is in America actually, she's very well known here, but that is Jacqueline Wilson. She wrote many stories about children who have gone through various things in their life. So either the parents having a bad divorce, the famous one is Tracy Beaker, she was in care. There's some that explore complex sibling relationships, all kinds of things like that. And they were very light-hearted, brilliantly illustrated, and they just dealt with really difficult issues in a really interesting way and a really engaging way for when you're a child as well. And I loved pretty much all of them. My favourite ones were the second Tracy Beaker book, which is The Dare Game. I had a soft spot for Midnight, actually, which is one of her... Well, it's not one of her later ones because she's still writing now, but I was getting older when I read that one, and it's about a complex brother-sister relationship, and that really resonated with me because I'm really close to my brother, but when we were younger, he would do kind of... He never ever hit me or anything like that, but there would be like psychological things he would do, and in the book it kind of explored that, so it was really interesting for me to read about. Don't get me wrong, I love my brother to bits, he's not abusive or anything like that, it's just normal sibling stuff, but it was really cool to read about that as a child. Yeah, I think those are my favourite ones that I want to talk about, but I read pretty much all of them. There's only a couple I didn't like, and I think she really succeeded in a way that many other authors haven't, and she should be commended for dealing with such difficult topics in such a wonderful way. Another childhood favourite author of mine was Roald Dahl. Obviously I loved Matilda. I think every single person in the world who loved to read and who read Matilda loved Matilda. I also really liked Esio Trot, which is this slightly more obscure one, and it has a really problematic storyline now that I think about it, but essentially it was about an old man and he fancied his neighbour who lived above him, and she had a pet tortoise and she wanted a tortoise to grow bigger, so he pretended to have a spell because he wanted her to fall in love with him. So he bought like 100 tortoises and kept swapping out the tortoise, making her think that he'd grown bigger and bigger, and at the end they get married, and yeah, he's basically kind of manipulated her into a relationship. But I loved that story when I was younger, and I also really enjoyed pretty much all of them. The BFG, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, The Witches as well, really liked that. I think Roald Dahl is just such a wonderfully creative author, and there's a kind of bluntness to his work. It doesn't really... There's nothing extra in his stories that you don't need, and I like the way he writes about children as real people and thinking like real people, because when you're a child reading that, it's really nice to know that adults are capable of perceiving you that way, because you don't feel like a child when you're a child in terms of how you view the world. So it's very... whatever the opposite of patronising is. Okay, so I think that's all the specific authors I wanted to talk about. More generally, I really also loved the Goosebumps series. I loved it so much, in fact, that I am planning at some point to reread them as an adult and do some videos on them, which I will be doing at some point along with the point horror videos that I've talked about before. But yeah, absolutely loved Goosebumps. There was also another series called the Midnight Library series, which I think are fairly obscure. They don't seem to be that common. You don't really find much if you Google about them, but they were essentially 4 or 12-year-olds, and they were like 3 different scary stories bundled together in a book, and they all had really cool bright covers, and I had them in my secondary school library, which is when I read them. And they weren't really scary. They were more advanced than Goosebumps, but less advanced than like actual adult horror books. So they were really enjoyable. So for the longest time, my favourite book in the world was The Tulip Touch by Anne Fine. Actually, Anne Fine's another author I should have talked about. Again, I don't know how well known she is in America. I don't even know if she's that well known here. She was when I was younger, but I don't really hear anything about her anymore. But she wrote a bunch of children's books, One of my favourites was The Chicken Gave It To Me, which is about it's told from the chicken's point of view, and basically the chicken finds out that aliens are planning to eat humans the way that humans eat chickens, and the chicken learns to write so it can communicate and save humanity. And that was one of my favourite stories. But the Tulip chapter, which is what I was actually going to talk about, this is such a complex book. Every time I've read it, and I read it about 5 times, I've read it in like a day. It's really short, obviously, because it's a children's book, but it's more a case of I just can't put it down. And this is about our main character who makes friends with another girl at school, and the other girl at school has like the worst family. So she's got basically abusive parents. She lives in a shack in the middle of nowhere. She doesn't have any money. And the main character's family owns this hotel, and they live in this big fancy hotel. So she befriends this girl called Tulip. I think the main character's called Natalie or something like that. And Tulip tells lies all the time, and she has a very dark sense of humour. So her and Natalie make up a bunch of games, and they're fun games, but they're also, sometimes there's a nasty edge to them. So they play one where like they'll pretend a random person they meet on the street smells, and they'll just like pull faces and genuinely be horrible to this person until they get embarrassed and walk away. And so the games all kind of have that nasty tint to them. And the Tulip Touch is just an exploration of their friendship and how it changes from primary school to secondary school, and how it becomes like a toxic friendship, and Natalie tries to cut Tulip out of her life, but she feels this incredible guilt about it because she's the only person Tulip has who cares about her. And I cannot put into words how well it describes that kind of toxic friendship and how it feels to try and get out of a toxic friendship. This is one of the books I would still recommend reading as an adult, and I'll probably reread it again many times in my lifetime. But I just think it's absolutely beautiful, and I think it's a shame it's not more well known, because again, it just handles something that happens to a lot of people in such a fantastic way, and it deserves credit for that. I think the final book I'm going to talk about is How to Train Your Dragon by Cressida Cowell, I think it's by. This is a very famous movie. It was a book first, and the book is very different from the movie. The book is about Hiccup, and in there it's about Viking times, and in this Viking culture, every Viking goes out when he reaches age, I think it's like 11 or something. Whenever they reach that age, they have to go out to this mountain and capture a dragon, and that is their dragon then. The dragons are amazing. They basically act like cats, but they can talk, so they're fantastically sassy and wonderful and adorable, and I love them to pieces. And there's many different types of species of dragon. So Hiccup's a bit of a awful Viking. He's not very good at it, but his father is chief of the tribe, so he's expected to get a dragon. And he goes out to this mountain and he finds a dragon, and it's the tiniest dragon, and it has no teeth. It's toothless, and it's basically about him trying to convince this dragon to be friends with him and obey him, so he doesn't shame his father. But he has no interest in being a Viking, really. And then there's also like a giant dragon comes and attacks the town, and they've got to solve that. And it's a whole series of books. I think I read at least the first 4, and I bought a couple more. I don't think I ever read them, and I probably will reread them at some point because I'd quite like to. It's a really enjoyable series. Again, it's got fantastic illustrations. It's got little fact pages which tell you about each species of dragons, which I loved. I was really into that kind of thing as a child, especially because I love dragons so much. And it was a really fantastic book. I know a lot of people love the film, but I would really recommend the book as well, especially for kids, because it's a fantastic kids book. But yeah, so that is some of my favourite childhood books. I've probably forgotten a whole bunch, so I might do another video in the distant future when I remember ones I haven't talked about yet. Do let me know about some of your favourite childhood books. I know a couple of YouTubers I watch have done videos like this, and I always really enjoy that kind of thing. So if you've done one, feel free to link it down below because I'd love to watch it. Let me know if you've read any of these books. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up, it helps me out massively. And I hope to see you next time.